fail, 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 hurt yourself, fail, fail, hurt yourself, fail, fail, and finally do it. And like, that's an incredible teaching. I mean, incredible. Some people might believe, oh no, I'm waiting for the singularity, that will solve the problems, that will solve the problem of my loneliness, of my anxiety, of my fear of death. I don't buy it. I'm interested in continuing to play the game. I'm fascinated with the way that place and culture interact, and I'm also very interested in the larger history of bohemia, alternative lifestyles, the returns of what I might call, sort of pagan inspiration, nature worship, ecstatic experience in the modern world particularly. And so this is a place I've known about for a very long time, coming through my own researchers of California history and asking the question, where did the hippies come from? And tracing that back even in earlier decades of California into the early 20th century, and realizing that there were some direct connections between people who brought sort of hippie lifestyles into California and movements in Europe. And of course, many of those point to Monte Verità, and so I've been familiar with that, as well as the history of Eranos, which is important to me as a scholar of comparative religion. So my particular training is in a line of scholars who descend from Eliade. I mean, we do things differently, but there's a sense of the importance of looking at multiple traditions, finding connections. For me, more about finding resonances and also appreciating differences. Sometimes in the past, there was more of an emphasis on, there's one shared truth between all religions, but I think Eranos' approach, more intellectual, is very simpatico. We're studying religious effects, but also open to the ways in which our modern condition demands a kind of spiritual response. And I could critique certain modes, but I appreciate the effort. So for me, it's a little bit even of a pilgrimage to come here. It's a happy one because everybody paid my way and I get picked up at the airport. It's very easy, so it doesn't really feel quite like a pilgrimage because I don't have any suffering. Except a little jet lag, but in other ways, on a soul level, it does feel very special to be here and even just wandering around the grounds, because I really very intensely feel the spirit of place and believe that being in a place you pick up, you can read things in the landscape. There are invisible transmissions everywhere. I don't have a story about energy or anything to explain that, but it makes it very happy to be here. For a long time, people saw modernity as being purely secular, or at least becoming increasingly secular, thereby producing this kind of spiritual or existential crisis that needed to be solved with new myths or renovated myths, revivals, returns. The more you look at the actual history, there's always these elements of people renewing, rebuilding, rediscovering, inventing anew, mixing anew. That kind of ferment continues. And yet also the sense of spiritual need or sacred vacuity also continues. And there is this drive towards some other domain or some other kind of meaning. My sense is that we don't really get to have a global myth. I think that, in a way, a global myth is a sort of scary idea, because I think diversity and divergence and contradiction and paradox aren't just valuable features of the spiritual life or a life well lived, but they're actually even protection functions against a kind of overly totalizing organization of human consciousness and human culture, which is something that is a potential technologically. And so I think in some ways we have no choice but to navigate a situation in which we're partly disenchanted and partly yearning for enchantment, and also partly discovering new sources of meaning and new sources of value. I tend to think that those have less to do with stories or images or myths in that sense, and that they have more to do with the phenomenology of experience and consciousness itself. I think the fact that now there's so much attention on consciousness, whether you want to think about awareness or attention, there's it's a complicated topic, but I think that there's a reason that we are really getting down to brass tacks in terms of being conscious beings, because there's something in the experience and the problem of being conscious that, in a way, is part of the answer to this question. It just doesn't take the form, it doesn't necessarily take a form that we maybe yearn for emotionally, where there's an organizing story and we find ourselves a place in a cosmology that we can map or we can understand through images. I don't think we get that now. I think we're in a more turbulent psychological, cultural, even mythical time, but that our line through it has to do with embodiment, with awareness, with awakeness, with the kind of unspoken energies that pass between people and places, people and animals, people and the stars, that there's sort of more of an unspoken beingness that remains available even when all the contents become chaotic, or when all the contents become hyper-technologized and hyper-circulated through technological media. As a historian of religion, there's one thing to note, which is that there have been many, 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 many times and places where people were utterly convinced that the end of the world was nigh. And it didn't happen, or it didn't happen that way. Or maybe in some ways their sense of the end of a world there was a world that was ending, a certain way of being in the world, a certain way of understanding the world that was ending, but it continues on. So I'm always cautious around calling the lip of the transcendental object at the end of time. Here it is. Oh, it's only 2 years away when AGI pops into reality, or it's only 10 years away when the robots happen, or whatever the point is. And I say that for a number of reasons. One, I think it's the best position to take critically and ethically, and that don't give up the game before you have to. And if we are in a way continuing to play a game, the human game, where there's some kind of gap between us and some ultimate cybernetic process that collapses our subjectivity and makes us something else, that if the game is to keep playing the game, then we keep playing the game. I don't believe that we have any reason to hope for some kind of escape or transcendence through that collapse. Some people might believe, oh no, I'm waiting for the singularity, that will solve the problems, that will solve the problem of my loneliness, of my anxiety, of my fear of death. I don't buy it. I'm interested in continuing to play the game. So you might say, well, what is the basis of that going to be as we enter a cybernetic world of AI intelligence and simulation and robots and robot lovers and all that? How can you possibly say that we can continue to play the game? And here I have a kind of interesting, it's like a thought experiment. And it's not entirely persuasive, but I still think it's worth thinking about. Let's imagine an early Enlightenment thinker, someone from 1700. Forward-looking, understands the implications of science and new technology, recognizes that something's happening with new ways of thinking, that religion as we know it doesn't tell the whole story, and that there is some kind of sense of futurity. Perhaps they've considered the possibility that there are civilizations on other planets. Perhaps they sense the way that technology is going to open up new domains and challenge cultural stories about the world. And you take them and you bring them forward to our moment today, even let's say 10, 15, 20 years ago. And they look at us, and they see us, and they see the way we are living. We are going to look to that person as if we are already swallowed up inside a cybernetic machine in which we have lost all kind of human sense of tact and grace and self-consciousness, and that even our speech acts are sort of already interpolated by all of these external mechanics. We will look like we're already swallowed up inside of the machine, particularly once you have a cell phone and everyone's checking and how language is operating. But of course, we don't experience it that way. You and I we have our mornings, coffee, oh, I'm struggling, I need to go to the gym, oh, what am I going to do about my girlfriend, da-da-da-da-da, even as we see the way in which the world is changing dramatically. So while I don't believe it is a rational hope, I do believe that we don't know the end of that game. We don't know the end of the game of ordinary, sort of anxious, sort of irritated, sort of frustrated human existence. It's not great joy. It has great joys in it, but it has a texture of anxiety, of disappointment, of frustration, but also value and inside humor, connection, joy, sex. It's a mixed bag. And that there's just no reason not to keep it going, because we don't know in what way the value of that game continues and sustains itself, even in what we would see now as an incredibly futuristic cybernetic environment. And the one sort of basis I have for this is sort of in the opposite direction, which is that if you look at how do human cultures, societies, or groups behave under extremely gruesome and exacting circumstances where you're at the very edge of life itself, say concentration camps. And you read concentration camp accounts, and you see that in some ways the game changes. People lose their capacity for empathy, or they're driven by survival, which creates a different kind of ethical reality. In some ways things are brutalized in a way that makes them not entirely recognizable, or at least not entirely relatable. But at the same time, there is interior life, there is spirituality, there is humor, there's curiosity, there's cleverness, there is courage, there is, of course, despair. And some movement through that space, some way, so these are extreme environments. And I'm like, in a way, part of what humans do is we put ourselves in new and extreme and sometimes terrible environments and somehow keep the game going. Here I'm thinking of something funny about science fiction films. Take a classic like Alien, right? So you have this crew on the ship, on the Nostromo. And you have like the nerdy doctor, turns out to not be a human being. You have the sort of working class people, and they're kind of rough and characters, and you look at that and you go, this is absurd. Of course, by the time that we're flying spaceships through the deep cosmos, we will be cyborged and completely different and maybe superhuman because of genetic engineering. We're not going to be a bunch of schlumpy people making fun of each other and like having sloppy meals together. And then there's another part of me that goes, well, but maybe actually that's the message, is that we keep playing this game. Let's hope to keep playing this game and not have the cybernet, the genetically engineered Ubermensch take over the situation. Is it a last frail hope? Perhaps. But I still see no reason to not keep playing the game, and in that sense, to really appreciate and affirm those aspects of human existence that are not so fun, even kind of immiserating. And so there's sort of a secret, not transcendence, but a kind of secret wisdom in the affirmation of the game, which is to just be like, yeah, this is kind of it. You know, I don't want to be translated into eternal life. I don't want to upload myself into this messy, confusing, terrifying situation. Is in a way kind of that's it. That's the game. That's the play, and I'm going to play it. I'm not going to wish it to collapse. And you can see a lot in culture. People and movements, and they want the collapse because on some level, I think they feel that collapse will allow them to escape. That's a very difficult thing to approach head on for me. And part of the reason is that I've trained myself quite consciously to reduce beliefs and to hold them very lightly, which means that I don't really organize my understanding of the world, my ethics, my responsive, intentionally or consciously based on belief system, with a few exceptions. Well, where do those exceptions come from? I would say that they come through the practice of life and the infection by ideas, images, stories that I can't shake, that withstand the acid bath of skepticism, not because I have some rational explanation for why I might hold this position, but more that it just keeps coming back and I can't quit it. So there's certain kinds of ethical norms or ideas that I have in my head that make me not a nihilist, but it's not that that's standing on either like just some kind of claimed belief or some kind of rational conclusion, because rational people are actually often nihilists in their attempt to ground things, and we can see that in many internet cultures very clearly. And so it's sort of an ad hoc collection of oddities in my shaman kit that I can pull out. You know, I can pull out Jesus, I can pull out some idea of karma, I can pull out whatever happens in meditation as a valuable thing. I can pull out a certain faith in being open towards the world, towards strange encounters, you know. And is there a belief there? It's more like there's a way of being in the world that shows up and has more coherence and more poetry in it as I get older. And I kind of see the fruits of my own maybe more painful earlier wrestlings with nihilism, with meaninglessness, with the attractions and the repulsions from belief systems. And so I would say it's almost like a traveler's mode where you're moving through spaces that aren't yours, and you're open to experiences, but you're not going to rest there, you're not going to stay there. And along the way you learn certain methods, certain attitudes, certain practices that seem to make that process go better, particularly about relating to other people, about a certain kind of honesty, both with other people and with myself. And a lot of that skepticism you see is, I don't really think, I mean, it has a skeptical quality, but it's really more like a certain kind of brutal honesty that I think is part of the spiritual equation, but has to be balanced with other elements. So another way of saying it is that to the degree there are beliefs, some of the beliefs are in contradiction with one another, and the game is a juggling. A little bit, I'm going a little too far over on this end, okay, come back over here, a little more balance. So there is a sense of balance, of symmetry, of a kind of martial art movement through the world of possibilities, within which beliefs play a function, but they're more like energies that can be used, drawn to, receded from, played with, And so it's more of like an ongoing practice of life rather than a kind of strict belief system. In terms of my own upbringing, I grew up in coastal Southern California in the late 70s and early 80s. It was a very permissive time, not very much parental overlooking. I mean, my parents loved me, but they gave me a long rope. And so I'm kind of growing up in the reflection of the counterculture. So it's like the counterculture has happened. It's sort of the spent fuel rockets are lying about, but it's very available. And what motivated my early curiosity, I don't know. Why I was interested in religion, why I was interested in subculture. So I was fascinated, as even in high school, I'm 13, 14 years old, I'm taking LSD, I'm going to hang out with Zen Buddhists, I'm going to the Hare Krishna temple, I'm going to see Grateful Dead concerts. Even in my high school, there were a few people who were sort of New Age kind of people. One guy had been part of EST, which was a big 70s kind of self-help regimen, and he taught a class called epistemics that was totally weird, and I took that. So there was just a way that I absorbed all of these influences and invitations from my culture around me, the landscape of Southern California, of coastal Southern California, in a sort of, relatively prosperous beach town. So there was a lot of surfers and I very much at a time when certain education models for the high school was fairly open-ended because it had that 70s quality. So I was someone who just did very well growing up in the 70s with those influences, and I really absorbed them. So I kind of feel in a lot of ways like I carry the influences that I have gotten as if they were transmissions. And I don't really worry about if they're super true or maybe they go the wrong direction. I just keep getting more, and they kind of like have sort of a character. They kind of demand there's something. So I sort of respect. In that way, I'm a very conservative person. That's what's funny is that I'm very loyal. I'm very loyal to the influences that I've gotten, like the Grateful Dead, like a certain kind of criminality. Like that was part of my world, and I honor that, and I don't have a problem with that. A certain kind of hedonism, a certain kind of danger, or a certain kind of humor. Like all of these things are things that I can remember. Where am I getting these influences by? And now I kind of carry them, and I kind of honor them because I realize that most of them are going to die or be transformed dramatically as we plunge into the future, and that part of my job is to kind of remember, reconstruct, articulate, narrate, spread on, certain things that have been the most valuable, like getting meditation. So, sometimes I think Buddhism is wrong, but I'm like, okay. So I'm a wrong Buddhist, so I do wrong Zen. Okay, and I kind of accept that side of it. But I think that's, for whatever reason, I came into the world with a very good anthropological radar. So I pick up all of these kinds of signals. Like being here is like I get it. Like I'm learning way more than I would get just from reading a book, just by being here, because I pick up these kinds of signals. And then I carry the residue in a way that I think is respectful, but also critical, and I'm willing to, I'm not an acolyte, but I do have respect for all of the characters and influences that I've met along the way. It's so hard for me to really answer that very well, because I have a lot of epistemological humility around young people and the world that they live in and what it actually feels like to be so immersed from the get-go in these processes that it becomes difficult for me to really say. However, I do have a few pieces of advice from an old Gen Xer who grew up in an analog world. I think of my generation as the analog sunset, because my mind, my experiences when I was a young when I was a child through being a teenager are almost exclusively analog. I remember the first personal computer I saw maybe when I was about 10 years old. A friend's house had it. My father there were computers at work, and I was fascinated by them. I've always been fascinated by digital technology and tracking it, but I have been shaped by an analog world, and I'm soon to be a dinosaur. But there's some things I would say. One is that it's incredibly important to form close friendships with people who are in the flesh, and to have adventures with friends that form bonds that you are doing with each other, not because it's part of a program or because you're all part of a school trip or whatever. It's something that you put your intention into building a posse, a squad, not just 2 people, but like 5 or 8, a kind of crew. And maybe you do things together, maybe you don't, but you sort of realize, well, like, this person is really good at this, they know how to do that, this one's really good with technology, this one understands, drugs, whatever the elements are, you kind of invest in a crew. And this will, and it has to be at least partly in person, I believe, and you're going through space together, you're having adventures together. I think that's a very important way to filter a lot of the kind of mind games and control mechanisms and influence games that are pervade the environment. I don't know, maintaining a sense of humor and really honoring a sense of humor and celebrating that and pursuing it and seeking out people who have a sense of humor and going that direction, I think is really, really important. I think it's one of the last, it's in a way, it's one of the most intimate forms of freedom we possess. You're on the scaffold, they're putting the thing down, you're absolutely terrified, you're crying from fear, and you can make a joke. You can laugh at the thing. And you can say, well, that's not real freedom. And you're like, actually. So there's a quality of humor that's sort of part of that crew, squad thing. There's a kind of camaraderie that I think sometimes is eaten up by social media and how people move about. Let me see if there's another, a final kind of way. What else I would say? Yeah, I think the other thing to do is that you're inundated by all this information. How do you guide yourself? How do you follow? You might not have a passion that you feel. You might not you don't no, I'm going to be this person. I'm going to do that. I'm going to study this. I'm going to go in this direction. How do you navigate? And it's like learning a certain way of listening to what's calling you. It's hard to describe. Maybe it's too subtle. But it's a certain way of hunting for your future self. And I think the attitude of hunting is a good one, actually, even though it has a little bit of violence implied in it. It's not going to just come to you. And in fact, there's going to be a lot of stuff that comes to you that isn't what you want. So the hunting is part of the skepticism. It's like, no, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Okay, I haven't found it yet, but I'm hunting. I'm a hunter. I'm a hunter of the meaning of my life. I'm a hunter of the images that are going to inspire me. I'm a hunter of the practices that I'm going to devote myself to. And I think that would be the final thing I would say, is that in a way it doesn't matter, but find a practice that has a physical component to it. It can be drawing, which is physical. It can be yoga, it can be martial arts, it can be meditation, it can be mountain climbing, da-da-da-da. I mean, some of the sports, they get a little bit commercial for my taste. I'm not convinced. I think it's hard to do some kinds of practices and not just be parasitized by the kind of consumer display of it. So it's always tricky with social media where everybody's displaying what they're doing, and that doesn't make sense to me. So that's the way in which I don't understand what it's like to be part of that world. But the devotion to a physical practice, or a practice that has a physical component over time, I think is incredibly rewarding and provides a kind of ballast against the sense of confusion or drift or overwhelm that is so much a part of our experience these days. One of the things that brings me most hope in San Francisco, where I live, is there's a skateboard, a kind of like crude skate park that was the city made. So it's not like a really nice skate park where it's all sculpted. It's really just a parking lot with a bunch of blocks and a couple small ramps. It doesn't look great. And in a way, it doesn't attract the like flashiest. It's more like what we call a bunny hill in like skiing, where it's like you kind of like, there's a lot of people who are learning, but also people who are pretty good. And there's something about it that it's just not commercial, it's not show off, it's very scrappy. And I only skateboarded a little bit. I wasn't great, but like I love skateboarding and I love that aspect of it. And it really brings me great joy every time I go through. I go, thank God. It's like, even when I see them smoking or whatever, I'm like, great, smoke that cigarette. Like, go, yeah, like have a drink. You got a 40 ounce there, and you're like 15. Go at, like it still has that kind of sense of like scrappiness, which to me is part of the teaching of the skateboard is a scrappy way of moving through space that's not predetermined and that is very collective and teaches practice. Talk about practice. You're just going to fucking fail, hurt yourself, hurt yourself, fail, and finally do it. And like, that's an incredible teaching. I mean, incredible. So I'm happy that culture is alive, even if it has its over-commercialized aspects.